Hello, let's go ahead and go over the Crisis and Absolutism chapter we're in Europe from the years 1550 to 1715. This is a really crucial time in European history as far as we look at the type of rulers that we have. Absolutism, if you look, the root word is absolute. We're looking at absolute rulers, so people who ruled kind of with an iron fist, had absolute authority in their kingdoms, didn't really want to share power with anyone or any lawmaking body. And as far as the crisis that we refer to in this chapter, we're going to be looking at a lot of religious wars between Protestants or people who protested the Catholic Church, as well as the Catholic Church itself. So we start off with the wars on religion. The Protestant Reformation was mentioned in the last chapter. It's a huge movement across Europe and several other parts of the world as well. It eventually makes its way to America and that sort of thing. But it's a huge movement where a lot of people kind of turn against the Catholic Church and they began to practice Protestantism. Basically, they don't believe in different practices that the Catholic Church has anymore. They've lost faith in the Catholic Church. They don't necessarily see the sale of indulgences as holy. They don't see the Pope as being something that's necessary. And basically, they're just wanting to get back to their Christian roots where, they focus on living a good life, practicing some of the same beliefs as the Catholics, but for the most part, it's a little different. However, you have to understand that just because these people reformed and they broke away from the church doesn't mean that everybody's getting along and everybody is just fine and dandy. We actually have a lot of issues between Catholics and Calvinists in particular. So Calvinism is a branch of Protestant Christians. Their main belief is in predestination, and they're formed by a guy named John Calvin. So that's where the name comes from. It's named after him. They are highly militant religions, meaning they're willing to fight for what they believe in. They're willing to kill for what they believe in. They're aggressive. They want to eliminate each other from, any kind of authority. So their struggle is basically the main cause of all of the religious wars that we'll see sweep across Europe. So in Spain, here you have King Philip II. He's known as the most Catholic of all the kings. Spain is one of the most powerful countries in the world at this time period. You have to keep in mind that they are traveling all over the world. We talked about the Columbian exchange, the different trade routes and things like that. Spain gets major claim in the New World, aka North and South America. And so Spain takes all this land and they, make good use of it. They get a lot of money out of it. They're seen as really rich, really powerful, and they have a lot of land in Europe as well. So to strengthen Spanish control over its territories, King Philip basically says that everyone should be Catholic because that makes a difference. And so Spain sees itself as a nation of people chosen by God to save Catholic Christianity from the Protestant heretics. Because if you don't believe in the Catholic ways, then you're a heretic and you are a hoodlum and you need to be persecuted. And so they play a large role in persecuting Christians who are not Catholic. And they're known for this. So in the Netherlands, because the Netherlands used to belong to Spain, they were one of the richest parts of Philip's empire. And he had really relied on this particular region to supply money because they're one of the main kind of regions because they're northmost. They're kind of on a coast. They trade quite a bit. They're really heavily involved in the triangular trade. And so for that reason, obviously, Philip wants to control them. He wants to make sure that they are all Catholic. He doesn't want to see any uprisings against him or against Catholics. And so he tries to crush Calvinism in the Netherlands and sends 10,000 troops to crush this rebellion in the Netherlands in 1566. He also faces resistance from the Dutch, which was led by William the Silent. So they struggle until about 1609 when their 12-year truce ends the war. And so a lot of these northern provinces start calling them the United Provinces of the Netherlands. And as a result, everyone in the world sees the Dutch Republic as just this, amazing, powerful nation, even though they're super small. They're pretty tiny compared to the rest of these other nations, but they're powerful because they have stood up against one of the most powerful countries in the world and won their independence from them, essentially, like gotten to, rule themselves. So the 1600s are known as the golden age of the Dutch as a result of this, because they become one of the world's greatest powers also. So here is King Philip over here, and he was going to tell William the Silent, or William of Orange, how to behave and how he wanted to see this kingdom run, because it's a part of this, it's a part of the Spanish Empire. And William's like, oh no, son, we ain't doing this. And so he's like pointing at him. He's got his hand like, don't you dare talk to me this way. So King Henry VIII reforms religion in England in 1534 after he breaks away from the Catholic Church. I know you've probably heard of King Henry VIII because he's the one who had the wives, 6 wives in particular. One, 2 of them he kills. Anyway, so his first wife he loves for the most part, but she couldn't give him a son. And since she couldn't give him a son, he thought he was being punished by God because she actually used to be married to his older brother until his brother died. They died as like teenagers, though. Supposedly they didn't consummate the marriage. Supposedly, she didn't really love him. Her heart belonged to Henry, and so she didn't want to divorce him, and she didn't think it was her fault. She just had some fertility issues. So Henry wanted to marry Anne Boleyn and hoped that she would give him a male heir. And so he asked the Pope to annul his marriage to Queen Catherine. And he's basically like, look, you have to annul this marriage. God is punishing me because I married my brother's wife. And since I married my brother's wife, I'm not going to get a male heir. And so he, throws his fit, tries to get the Pope to kind of understand and deal with it. And the Pope says no. So then Henry goes to the Archbishop of Canterbury, which is he turns to the English court system, churches. And Thomas Cranmer recognizes that his marriage to Catherine is null and void. So then that June, he and Anne Boleyn, are married, and Anne Boleyn's crowned queen. And then they have a daughter 3 months later. Pretty scandalous. She was probably pregnant before they got married. Who knows? The next year, Henry finalizes his break from the Catholic Church, and he says that he's no longer Catholic. His church is the Church of England, and he declares himself the only supreme head on earth of the Church of England in 1534 by the Act of Supremacy. And so as a result, the Church of England breaks away from the Catholic Church. And even though they're not Catholic, or they don't practice the Catholic Church's, I don't know, they practice most of the Catholic Church's teachings. They see Henry as like the main leader. There's no other pope. Like, Henry's the head of the church. And he's the king. So he's ruler of all, absolute, basically. So when he dies, by the way, his other wives, I'll give you the quick rundown. So Anne Boleyn was his second wife. She's accused of adultery, and so he beheads her. That's the first one that he kills. Then he gets married again. His third wife, he really loves her. He tries his best, he's happy with her. She's compliant. They get along well. She gives him a son. Everything's great, but she dies during childbirth. So it's kind of sad. So he's distraught. He's heartbroken. And one of his advisors tries to set him up with another woman. Her name is Anne of Cleves. And he hates her. He says that she's fat and she stinks, and he doesn't want to sleep with her. And so he doesn't kill her. He actually sends her away, gives her her own estate to live in and manage, and takes care of her, sends her money and stuff. She kind of gets she gets a good deal. I mean, she doesn't have to sleep with him. She doesn't have to marry him. And then in turn, she gets her own house and money and whatever else. So that was the third wife. The fourth wife, she actually was an adulteress. And so he has her beheaded. And she actually says on her deathbed, "I'd rather die the wife of Thomas Culpeper than the Queen of England." And so she's basically like, I don't regret it at all. Like, she's definitely caught cheating on him, though. The next wife is, I feel like I'm forgetting one. Am I forgetting one? Oh, the last wife is actually the wife that survives him. She outlives him. He dies from a jousting accident, injury, infection sort of thing. And she is able to live peacefully. So it all works out for the most part. His son from his third wife that died during childbirth actually succeeds him as King of England. Edward dies at age 15, unfortunately, from tuberculosis. They didn't have the whole, you don't have vaccines and stuff then, and so it's really unfortunate. So once he dies, his older sister Mary becomes queen in 1553. So Mary, I know y'all have heard of Bloody Mary. She is the daughter of Henry VIII's first wife, Catherine of Aragon. She is Catholic, and because her father was like a hardcore Catholic while he was married to his mother, and the only reason that he turned away from the Catholic Church is because the Catholic Church didn't want to annul his marriage to her mother, she wants to restore Catholicism in England because she's a little bitter about the fact that her dad decided to go all Protestant and go against the church and divorce her mom. By the way, her mom supposedly died from like heart disease or something. They say she had a broken heart. How sad. Anyway, so they call her Bloody Mary because she had more than 300 Protestants burned as heretics. And so they, obviously she's like killing all these people, Bloody Mary. As a result, England is even more Protestant by the end of her reign than it had been in the beginning because people resent her for it. They're like, this is why we're not Catholic, because the Catholics are crazy and just killing everybody. So she dies in 1588 from reproductive system disease, possibly ovarian cancer. And then after she dies, her sister, who was the daughter of Anne Boleyn, becomes Queen Elizabeth I. Elizabeth Tudor is actually one of the most powerful Protestant queens of England ever. She rules from 1588 until she dies. She helps England become a world power. She is known as one of the greatest rulers of England. She repealed a lot of laws that favored Catholics enacted by her sister. And she's also known as Good Queen Bess or the Virgin Queen. So a lot of pictures you'll see in history books. I don't know. There's a couple of history books that actually have her like on the cover of the books because like she's just known as like such a good queen. She was really personable. She would go out and kind of like wave to the crowds and was very like polite and wanted to be a part, like wanted people to know that she cared about them. And so she's very personable in that sense. And they call her the Virgin Queen because supposedly she never took a lover. She never married anyone. I don't know. I'll let you be the judge of that. A new act of supremacy named Elizabeth as the only supreme governess of both church and state. And so she's very similar to her father in that. The Church of England under Queen Elizabeth followed a moderate Protestantism, and it kept most people satisfied. So she didn't try to go hard one way or the other. She just tried to kind of like be tolerant and moderate in her foreign policy. And so she doesn't want Spain. She also tries to do this in her foreign policy. She doesn't want Spain or France to be too powerful. And she even supports like really weak nations to prevent those nations from becoming too powerful. So she doesn't fight the powerful nations. She just helps support other weaker nations and makes a lot of allies that way. Very crafty, very good politician, good at what she did. Supposedly, like, whenever she died, like, a lot of people say, like, she poisoned herself because it was, like, her makeup. You see how white her makeup is? They said that her makeup had, like, it was made of like poisonous materials. I'm not really quite sure exactly what, but yeah. The makeup that people wore obviously wasn't tested, and so I want to say it might have been like some sort of arsenic or something that was in her foundation. Anyway, I'll have to look it up and get back with you on that. Anyway, so the Spanish Armada. An armada is just basically like a fleet of ships. So Spain's armada was really powerful. Obviously, they're this world power that travels back and forth from Europe to America. And so in 1588, Philip II is like, I think I'm going to send the armada to attack England. He wants to end Protestantism. He sees that England is becoming more powerful. He doesn't like that they're Protestant because, he's the most Catholic king. And he's got to get rid of any kind of like opposition. And so he sends the fleet to set sail, and they don't have enough ships or manpower, and so they never win. So the Armada was battered by the faster English ships and then encountered terrible storms whenever they were returning home. By the end of Philip's reign in 1598, Spain was not a great power that it once was. They actually go bankrupt from the cost of wars because he's steadily fighting people and trying to kill people. The armed forces are weak and the government is inefficient. And so as a result, England and France become the two new powers. And we'll talk more about England and France, obviously, in the next couple chapters as well. So in France, because we're just kind of like traveling all over Europe during this time period, France is experiencing some religious wars. So they obviously are having issues just like England did with the Catholics and the Protestants. Only their Protestants are called Huguenots. So they're French Protestants. Almost half of the French nobility becomes Huguenots. And that makes them like a really powerful political threat to the crown, because the crown is typically made up of Catholics. Ultra Catholics are known as extreme Catholics, and they opposed the Huguenots. And so for 30 years, they would fight in battle and go on and on and on. And so obviously, like, the battles kind of like die down in 1598, but there is still definitely animosity between the two groups even afterwards into the next couple. There's still animosity today, like between different religions today. So we roll on over to Henry IV and the Edict of Nantes. So in 1589, Henry of Navarre was a Huguenot political leader, and he goes to the throne as Henry IV. And they basically, he converts to Catholicism. So he is a Protestant and known as a Protestant. And then he converts to Catholicism to make the Catholics in France happy with him. So when he becomes king in 1594, a lot of the fighting kind of like slows down, stops. And then he issues the Edict of Nantes in 1598, which recognizes Catholicism as the official religion of France and gives all the Huguenots the right to worship and enjoy all of their political privileges, like holding public office. So he tries to give everyone the best of both worlds. He's like, I can be Catholic, but I can be a tolerant Catholic. If you guys would just kind of chill out, like we'll fix this. So from 1560 to 1650, Europe saw a lot of severe economic and social crises. One of those problems was inflation or rising prices. Obviously, land and food is super expensive. Spain and Italy were in an economic decline because, they had been fighting wars or, dealing with plague or famine. And so the population starts to decline. There's also a major concern for witchcraft. And so, the search for heretics continues, of course, because of the Inquisition. The Inquisition, where everybody is kind of like trying to spot out those people who are heretics and against the Catholic Church. So more than 100,000 people are charged with witchcraft during this time. People fear witches, but they also fear being accused of witchcraft because it didn't take much to have to be accused. So poor common people were usually the ones that are accused. 75% of those people are women. Most of them are single or widowed and over 50 years old. And so they would be tortured until they confessed. Even if they weren't witches, they would just confess to get the torture over with. A lot of people swore their allegiance to the devil and attended Sabbaths, or they said that this is what they were, told the people so that they would quit torturing them. Sabbaths are just like nightly gatherings where they would feast and dance. Others admitted to casting evil spells. Witch trials started lessening finally in 1650. There's also I've got an assignment posted for you guys about witchcraft in this time period, so that you can see kind of see some firsthand witness accounts of what these trials were like and how they tested the witches. So you'll see more about that in that assignment. So witch trials start to die down in 1650 once the governments are more stable and officials are less willing to disrupt society with the trials. People also found it unreasonable to believe in the old view of a world haunted by evil spirits. So even though like people like let it go, like they kind of like get over it after a certain time, you see a lot of these paintings where like women are worshiping the horned beast and like they're bringing babies to like sacrifice to the devil and things like that. There's a lot of like portraits and stuff that kind of depict witchcraft at this time, like as these nightly Sabbaths where they kill children, they sacrifice babies and things like that. Oh, and I think there's like kids hanging over here. Yep. Yeah. Anyway, you get the picture. So from 1618 to 1648, we have the 30 Years' War. This is the last of the religious wars. There's also an assignment that goes with this particular in this time period, and it has to do with France. So you'll do it before the witchcraft assignment, but there's a massacre, St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, that happens in France during this time period where, thousands and thousands and thousands of Protestants are massacred by Catholics. So basically there's another religious war between Protestants and Catholics, and then it turns into a territory struggle between nations. So all major European powers except for England are involved in this war in some way. Germany gets plundered and destroyed, and then eventually we reach the Peace of Westphalia, which ends the war, and then divides Germany, or the Holy Roman Empire, into independent states so they can determine their own religion and stop fighting, basically. Germany, as a result, is a broken nation. The Holy Roman Empire, aka Germany, it's a broken nation. You won't see it as a united nation for another 200 years. So, and there are the German states. That's the boundary of the Holy Roman Empire, and kind of where, it's divided up into like 200 small states, basically small territories. So in England, you have an English Revolution that's like a struggle between the king and Parliament. Parliament is the lawmaking body in England. And so they're trying to decide basically like what role the king should play and what role Parliament should play. So when Queen Elizabeth dies in 1603, her nephew, King James I, becomes king. He's king of England and Scotland. His mother was Mary Stuart, and she was the rightful heir to the throne of Scotland. She gives up her right to the throne in exchange for protection so long as her son can become king. And so Elizabeth agrees because she doesn't have an heir, and as a result, he becomes king of Scotland and England, like a united Scotland and England. James believed that he received his power from God. And so since he received his power from God, he was responsible only to God. And that's called the divine right of kings. The divine right of kings basically says that Parliament is useless and has no power because God gave the king all that power. So there's a lot of tension between king and Parliament during his rule. This continues into King James I's son Charles' reign. Charles becomes king, and then Parliament says that he can't tax people without Parliament's consent. So Charles is like, fine, if that's what you want, then we'll do that way. But then he continues to tax the people anyway. So Charles then tells everyone that they need to be a part of the Church of England. So then everyone starts leaving England and going to America because they're like, this guy's crazy. We don't have to listen to him. We're not going to listen to him. So in 1642, England is in a civil war over all of this conflict because people can't really necessarily decide how things should be. They can't decide if they should have, like, Parliament should have more power or if the king should have more power, if there should be a balance. So you have two different groups that form, two different sides that form during the Civil War. Just like the American Civil War, you have the Confederates and you have the Union, the Confederacy and the Union. Here you have Cavaliers or Royalists and you have Roundheads. So your Cavaliers are on the King's side and your Roundheads are on the Parliament side. So this guy, Oliver Cromwell, is basically he's like a military genius, okay? He creates a very well-disciplined new model army, and it's made up of a lot of Protestants. So you can guess that they're probably going to go against the Church of England. They are fighting against the king, and Cromwell tells his soldiers that this is all for God. He's like, this is a battle for God. We're fine. So the new model army takes control of the government, finally, and then Cromwell dismisses Parliament. He gets rid of anyone who's loyal to the king, executes them, whatever. Then they execute King Charles on January 30th, 1649. So basically, Cromwell is like, hardcore. He runs this coup d'etat, takes over the government, executes the king, and then Europe is just like, wow, like we need to watch out because like this could happen anywhere. So then all of Europe is like shook and they're like freaked out that this random military genius has popped up and basically overthrown the King of England, which is the most powerful country in the world at this time, or one of them. Well, then Cromwell decides he doesn't like Parliament at all. So not only does he get rid of Parliament members that support the king, he gets rid of all of Parliament by force. As the members depart, he shouts, "It's you that have forced me to do this, for I have sought the Lord at night and day, and he would slay me rather than put upon me the doing of his work." But then he sets up a military dictatorship. Cromwell rules England until he dies in 1658. By the way, he dies from like a urinary tract infection or a kidney infection. Pretty crappy way to die if you're like this military genius that's like taking over the country. Anyway, so then King Charles the first son, Charles II, becomes king again. Cromwell's son tries to like follow in his footsteps and tries to like rule the country for a time. He just isn't very successful. People don't support him as much. He's not the same guy that his dad is. So we go back to the king's son. So Charles II becomes king, and he rules as a Protestant. He's like, I can keep the peace. I can be Protestant. Everything's cool. Charles II dies with no heirs. So his Catholic brother takes over and becomes king. James is Catholic, and now there's more conflict because everybody's like, great, now we've got a Catholic king. Instead of killing the king like they did the previous time, because they've already killed this guy's dad, they decide that they're going to chill because he's old already, and his daughters are Protestant. So if his daughters become queens of England, they'll be tolerant. So like they just kind of chill out. But then, here's Oliver Cromwell. This is the little squirt that takes over England. Yeah. So then James shocks everybody, and he gets married to a Catholic woman, and he has a son. So then everybody's kind of freaking out because they're like, great, now he has a Catholic son. We thought his Protestant daughters would inherit the throne. So, we're kind of out of luck there now. His son is going to get it. We're going to be Catholic all over again. So the solution was to get William of Orange to invade England. So the English nobles get William to come over and like take over the country. William was married to King James's daughter, Mary. So it's not like, it's not like he was just some random outlying person. Like he had been a prince, like he had some authority, had some experience, and he's married to the king's daughter. So he comes over and they have a really difficult decision to make because if you can imagine going against your father or your father-in-law, to take his place as rulers, that's obviously a tough decision. It's either do that or be social outcast because everybody's going to hate you. So William's like, let's do it. So they invade England, and King James sends his army to fight, but then a lot of his soldiers desert. And so he has no choice but to grab his second wife and son, and they run away to France. So there's like no bloodshed. They call it the Glorious Revolution because like there wasn't any violence, nobody died, and everything was great. So Parliament offered the abandoned throne to William and Mary, and they accepted. And they also signed the Bill of Rights in 1689, which is really important because the Bill of Rights actually secures power for Parliament. It basically divides power between the king and queen in Parliament. And so there's William and Mary. Oh, woe is me, the new kings and queens. So now the king and queen of England, thanks to Parliament, and they give them power as an exchange. So under Louis XIV, we're looking at France now, moving over to France. Absolutism is a system in which a ruler holds total power. So that's what this chapter is about. You've noticed we've talked about like some rulers with absolute authority. Absolutism is tied to the divine right of kings. So a lot of the kings that we've talked about thus far have said that they were given their power from God, and they should have all the power. So King Louis XIV is the perfect example of absolutism. He comes to the throne in 1644 at the age of 4, and he was really young. So he had a Cardinal Mazarin, who's the chief minister, who basically ran the government for him while he was, a child. He crushed a revolt led by nobles and maintained a strong monarch for Louis XIV to inherit. So when Mazarin died in 1662, Louis takes over and is the supreme ruler. He calls himself the Sun King and says that he's the source of light for all of his people. So Louis's royal court at Versailles served 3 purposes. Like, number 1, it's the personal household of the king. Number 2, the chief offices of the state were located there. And number 3, Versailles was the place where powerful subjects came to find favors and offices for themselves. So Louis would remove his biggest threat, so any like nobles and princes from the royal council, and he would entice them to come to Versailles, where he would keep them busy with court life and out of politics. So he'd just throw parties and like hang out and do whatever and like keep them busy so they wouldn't focus on the political side of things. And so he could rule absolutely without very much interference. He would bribe important people in provinces to see that his policies were carried out in local governments as well. He destroyed Huguenot churches and schools and outlawed Protestantism. And so as a result, you have more French people, French Protestants at that, leaving France and heading over towards America for religious freedom. So this is the Palace of Versailles. Super intricate, super detailed, beautiful. We could talk more about that, but we're going to move on. So France under Louis XIV is, for the most part, pretty decent. He increases exports and decreases imports by raising taxes on imported goods. And so he helps the country make more money in that sense. He develops a standing army of about 400,000 in time of war. And he rules absolutely until his death in 1715. It's said that he told his successor, who was his grandson at the time, to be more peaceful and not to overspend and to make everyone happy. So basically, get along with everybody. Don't fight. Just be happy. So over in Russia, because got to get back to Russia some, Russia has become a great power under the leadership of Peter the Great. Ivan IV became the first Tsar of Russia. Tsar is just the Russian word for Caesar, or king, basically. So Russia expands, and they get more territory in the east. They also crush the power of the Russian nobility, or the boyars, under Ivan, and they call him Ivan the Terrible because he's ruthless. So Peter helps make this country, helps make this like great nation, and then Ivan basically like crushes anyone who goes against him. Ivan the Terrible was ruthless, though. He even stabbed his own son to death in the middle of a heated argument. So after his death in 1598, there was a time of troubles and anarchy, and then that ended when the National Assembly decided to choose Michael Romanov as the new Tsar in 1613. So that starts the Tsar dynasty, or the Romanov dynasty, which lasts until 1917, whenever we get the Russian Revolution. So Peter the Great became Tsar in 1689. He ruled as an absolute king who claimed the divine right to rule. Peter westernized Russia, and he borrowed European technology to make Russia a great military power also. So people really enjoyed him. They liked him because they made Russia, like he helped make Russia this like awesome power. So here is Russia in 1505, Russia under Ivan the Terrible, and then Russia under Peter the Great. All right, and that is it. We'll pick back up with Revolution and Enlightenment. We'll probably only cover Revolution up until like Christmas break. After Christmas, we'll come back and we'll work on the Enlightenment. So, hope you guys have a lovely rest of your day. Let me know if you need anything. Send me an email, whatever you got to do. Make sure you've got all your assignments turned in. See you guys.